Our last teller of the night is Ann Polaha. She's been with the Guild about 2 years. She is what's known as the featured teller. She's going to tell for a half hour, and the tellers have the choice. It can be a couple of short stories for that total, or a cumulative total, or it can be an entire half hour. It's up to her. And in keeping with Valentine's spirit, her story is going to be a story of losing her first love. Anybody lost her first love? Yeah, we all have, haven't we? Okay. And it's called An Ode to Tony. Ann Polaha.
This was our song. I had to get you in the mood. I can't sing, but I can dance. Last Thanksgiving, mostly every Thanksgiving, I go to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. That's my hometown, and I have a few relatives left there. One of them is my youngest daughter. My other daughter and her family come, and sometimes my son does, but he wasn't there this time. My daughters and I were in the kitchen starting to get the meal ready. We were enjoying a glass of wine and just being together, and my sister blows in. My sister can only enter the room by blowing in. She always comes in with her hands full, with food and presents and news. And that day she came in and she said, "Jen, look, I made that salad you like. I found the recipe." And then she said, Jody, do the boys still like that Under Armour clothes? I found a really good deal and I got them some shirts." And then she looked at me and she said, Ian, guess who died? What was his name? Guess who died? And I'm like, well, I haven't lived in this town for 50 years. I can't be somebody, that's gonna. She goes, "Your old boyfriend, you know what was his name?" And I felt like somebody punched me in the stomach. And I went rolling back over 50 years, back to when Tony was my boyfriend. We met after 9th grade at the playgrounds where all the kids who couldn't drive hung out. And my girlfriends thought he was really cute. I didn't think he was my type. But of all the girls there, I seemed to be the one he was interested in. And at 15, you're not going to turn down a free boyfriend. He was a medium height, medium build, dirty blonde hair, and Paul Newman eyes. And when those blue eyes looked at me and smiled, I was a goner. Well, we talked and fooled around a little bit, and then one night he asked to walk me home. And we walked up the back alley behind my house, and he kissed me goodnight. And I ran in the house, and I was so excited, and I guess I was a teller back then, because I wanted to tell somebody, and my best friend was at camp. So I went to my father's desk, and I took a piece of his letterhead, and I wrote to my friend Marcia, and I can still see the words that I wrote. "And then he kissed me!" Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And then I finished the letter, and that's when I realized that, I didn't have an envelope, I didn't have a stamp, I didn't even have an address. That's okay. I folded it up, left it on the desk, and figured I'll figure it out in the morning. The next morning I heard, "Betty Ann, get down here now!" "What? This about you kissing boys in alleys? How have I raised you? This is just unacceptable. Blah, 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 blah." By the time he got finished, I felt like the biggest tramp in Fountain Hill. And when he got done with me, he started on my mother. because she was the one who was supposed to be watching me. Well, when school started, having Tony for a boyfriend had a big drawback. He didn't go to my school. So we couldn't pass notes in the hall, and we couldn't eat lunch together, and we couldn't have any drama about me seeing him talking to somebody else in history class. But there was one thing Tony had. When Tony smiled at me, his eyes said that I made the sun shine, and I made the sun set, and that I was the prettiest girl in the whole world. And that was enough. Besides, there was a drawback to dating me, because my parents were paranoid. Paranoid that I'd get pregnant in high school. And there was a reason for this that I didn't know at the time. But when I learned to do the math, I figured out that my parents were married in September. I was born in April. I came in at 8 pounds, 10 ounces. There was no way I was premature. It was when the war was on, and my dad was in the Army, and my mother had to deal with the shame and the disgrace of having to get married. And my parents were bound and determined that history would not repeat itself. Well, my school had dances, but kids from other schools couldn't come. So Tony asked me to go to the movies. I asked my mother. She said no. But teenage girls have superpowers. We can whine, and we can cry, we can beg, we can plead, we can reason, we can promise, we can pray, we can do it all. And I did it all. And my mother finally came up with a plan. She said, you can go to the movies with a boy, provided you go in the daytime to the Sunday afternoon matinee, and no cars are involved. That meant that Tony had to walk over a mile to my house, and then the two of us walked back toward his house, plus another mile to the movies. Tony was walking 6 miles to take me to the movies. But it was even more than that, because Tony and I wanted to stretch out our time together. So after the movies, we took a detour, and we walked through the park and found a deserted park bench and talked for a while. Well, meanwhile, my mother was home cooking dinner. And you see, she hadn't run this plan, this movie plan thing, past my father. So if she were to finish cooking dinner and put it on the table, and I wasn't there, questions would be asked. Tony and I had a total of 3 movie dates. And when I came home from the 3rd one, she said, you are not allowed to go steady, and going to the movies 3 times with the same boy constitutes going steady. If you want to continue to go to the movies, you have to find somebody else to take you. Well, Tony and I kind of limped along. One of the things he used to do was he used to cut his last class at school and take the bus over to my school so he could walk me home. And that's how we went along until December, and Tony said, my school is having a Christmas dance. A Christmas dance. A dance that you go to, you know, at night in a car, and you wear a pretty dress, and I asked my mom if I could go, and she said no, and I turned on the superpowers. And finally she figured that, well, Tony couldn't drive, so we would be chaperoned to the dance, and the dance would be chaperoned, and the ride home would be chaperoned. And she said okay, and she even got my father on board with this. And I made myself a new dress. It was dark green velvet on the top and white brocade on the bottom. Tony came to my house in a sport coat, and my father grumbled at him, and then we went out and we got in the car, and my mother watched from the window. And to her horror, what did she see? She saw me getting into a 1949 Plymouth Jalopy that another boy was driving. Her daughter was in a car, not with one boy, but two boys. This was unacceptable, too. She fretted and she fretted and she worried and she fretted until she couldn't stand it anymore. She put my two little brothers to bed, and my dad always fell asleep on the sofa. She got in the car and she came to the dance. But I wasn't there. Tony and I went out to get some air, take a little walk. I think I'm glad I wasn't there, but all she could do was go home and worry some more about what was happening to her virginal daughter in the clutches of two boys in a jalopy. When I got home, she was furious. She thought we lied to her, and I said we didn't. You see, Tony was the youngest child in his family. His parents had been through the first dance and the first date a couple of times. So when he asked for a ride, his father said that night to Larry, Tony's older brother, "Take your brother to the dance and make sure you pick him up and bring him home." And that's what Larry did. But my mother said, "What kind of people send a teenager in a jalopy to pick up a girl, a nice girl? This is just not a good family. You don't have to have anything to do with this boy again. I don't want you to see him ever again. Besides, you're only 15. There's lots of boys out there. You need to go out with different boys and learn about boys." By that time, I had been with Tony for 6 months. I thought maybe she has a point. Maybe I should go see who else wants to date me. And so I started hanging out with my girlfriends again. And everywhere we went, whether it was the movies or just for a walk or buy a hot dog somewhere, we'd run into Tony. I accidentally, maybe on purpose, today they call that stalking. But I kind of saw it as devotion. And after I had gone to maybe 2 dances and nobody asked me to dance, well, who would you rather be when you were 15 and unsure of yourself? Do you want to be a wallflower? Or do you want to be the girl that makes the sun rise in the morning and the sunset in the evening and the prettiest girl in the whole world? So I went back to Tony. And that started a thing that happened over and over and over again. Tony and I would sneak around. He'd cut school and come and pick me up and walk home. And he did that enough times that somebody said to my mother, "Oh, I see Betty Ann walking out with a boy. Does she have a boyfriend?" We'd get caught. I'd get a lecture. We'd break up. Nobody'd ask me to dance. If Tony was there, I'd go back. Happened all the time. One neighbor called and said, "How come there's a boy that just walks Betty Ann to the corner and doesn't walk him all the way up to your house?" Caught again. Even when Tony learned to drive, my mother remembered that car. He inherited from his brother, and there was an APB out. I broke up with Tony so many times, and every time I did, it was really emotional and sad and romantic. And we used to play that song you heard, because it says, "Take good care of my baby," And if you should discover that you don't really love her, just send my baby back home to me. I was flattered. And by my junior year, I was famous. Most of the adults in Fountain Hill knew my story, and every kid at school knew it. I had the starring role in Romeo and Juliet of Fountain Hill. My mother had her allies, or spies rather. People would report seeing the car, seeing me everywhere, and my mother wised up too. She'd get into her car. She'd surprise me, pick me up from school, surprise me, pick me up from the dance. Got caught a couple times that way. And we had our allies too. Kids I didn't even know would come up to me and say, "Betty Ann, your mother's outside, I saw her car." And of course my girlfriends, they would always cover for me. They'd pick me up, take me someplace to meet Tony, and then I'd meet them again and they'd take me home. I didn't like that life. I was a good Catholic girl, but I couldn't help it. It was romantic, it was emotional, I was popular. Everybody knew who I was, and it was sad and tragic and everything, and it all came to a crashing halt in January of that year. I was a cheerleader. I cheered for the JV team. I went to the games, I cheered for the JV teams, and then I left and went out with Tony. One night, we lost track of the time. I missed my ride home. My mother was at home calling all my girlfriends, and you know, we didn't have cell phones back then. This could have been a whole different story. But they were all giving different stories to her, and she let them know what she thought of good Catholic girls who were liars. And she wouldn't hesitate to tell their mothers when she saw them next. And we lost a lot of allies that night. When I got home, she said, "Pack up your cheerleading outfit, you're done." And she said, "Give me Tony's number." She called up his parents and told them to keep their son away from me. And then she put me under house arrest. For 2.5 months, I didn't go anywhere except to school. And my mother drove me to school and picked me up every day. And that was unheard of back in 1960. Unheard of. You didn't want your parent to pick you up from high school. It's embarrassing. But she didn't keep Tony and I apart, because Tony figured out that, you see, my school didn't have a cafeteria. They let us out to go buy lunch for an hour every day. And Tony figured out he could just play hooky, come to my school and see me at lunchtime. He did that quite a bit. But I did have a lot of time at home. And I was tired of the sneaking around and the lying and all that stuff. And I said, when my mother lets me out of this house, I'm going to tell her that I'm going to go right back to Tony, because I love him. We belong together. And nothing you can say or do is going to stop us. So you can keep me locked up in this house forever. But when I get out, I'm going back to Tony. And if that didn't work, well, when Tony and I, when we graduated from high school, we could, I don't know, maybe get married or something. You know, I didn't think too hard about it, but that was my mindset until spring, and the girls in school started talking about the prom and what their dresses were like and who was asking who, and nobody was talking about Romeo and Juliet anymore. And I wanted to go to the prom, and I thought, maybe I can use my superpowers one more time. But the day I said prom to my mother, she said, "If you want to go to that prom, you better find somebody else to take you, because you'll go to the prom with that boy over my dead body." And this is the shameful part. I found somebody else to take me. I did. But I didn't have a good time, so. And my mother was letting me out again, and I was thinking about maybe Tony was it for me. And I got a summer job. And there was another boy there. And he was there every day, and we could talk in the halls, we could eat lunch together, and he started giving me rides home. Well, about the third time he gave me a ride home, I said, you know, you better let me off at the corner, because I know this sounds really weird, but my mother has this stupid thing that if you see a boy 3 times, it means you're going steady, and she won't let me see you anymore. I just drop me off at the corner. And the boy looked at me and he said, if I'm going to take you home, I'm going to take you to your door, or I'm not going to take you home at all. Wow. This was different. This was somebody who wasn't afraid of my mother. Wow, and he didn't want to sneak around or tell lies, or... And that was the day I tell my husband I started to fall in love with him. But it wasn't over yet. I had my whole senior year to go through. And Joe was playing hard to get. After all, I had this reputation of always going back to Tony. And Tony wasn't giving up. There were some car chases through Fountain Hill. And words were exchanged. And Tony started taking more and more days off from school and coming down to see me at lunchtime. And it was hard. It was hard to make a final break, because he made me feel like the most beautiful girl in the world. I was important to him. I made the sunshine and sunset, and he would be lost without me. And it was really, really hard. But my mother got me out of it. Because, you see, my mother was all tied up worrying about me getting pregnant in high school. She wasn't paying attention to herself. And she got pregnant while I was in high school. So I told Tony, I said, Tony, we have to stop this. I can't do this to my mother anymore, especially not now. I cannot. And that was it. I went off to college, but still, every once in a while, he'd send feelers to other people, like, when you come home for Thanksgiving, do you want to hook up? And I never did. And now my sister was reading his obituary. And she was saying he'd been in the Navy, and he'd been a traffic cop, and he'd been a judge, and he was married, and he had 3 kids and 5 grandchildren. He belonged to this club, and he belonged to that club. And I said, what? I had 2 glasses of wine by now. What does it say about me? I should be in there. I should be in there. And then she read, he graduated from Liberty High School. And I said, no, he didn't. And everybody went, what? And I said, he went to Central Catholic High School. And when we reached our senior year, they told him he couldn't get a diploma because he had been absent too much. So that's how I contributed to Tony's life. But I was there, you know, I was there kind of in black and white. And you know, over the years, 50 years, sometimes I'd go back to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and maybe I'd be at a festival or in a crowded restaurant, and occasionally, not often, I'd think, what if I ran into Tony? What if I looked into his eyes? Would I see the girl who made the sunshine and the sunset? And now, I never will, because he's gone. Rest in peace, Tony. Thank you.